to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. Before we go ahead and get started, need to make sure that because we're broadcasting still from Arlington, Texas, that we have a little bit of connectivity going on throughout the interwebs. And so let's check over on YouTube and make sure that things are booting up. It looks like we're alive and well over there. Let's check over on locals. Looks like we're alive and well over there as well, my friends. So we can go ahead and get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We've got judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice, and it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today because we've got a lot to get into. You can see that we're broadcasting still from Arlington, Texas. We just wrapped up a little bit. We're not done yet. We've got another day of our conference, finishes up tomorrow. And so today, the show's a little bit interesting. I have a ton of clips from a lot of the different things that are going on in the world, but I haven't actually watched any of them. I just downloaded them, threw them into the slides. And so we're going to be able to go through this together. And so I want to start off by going through what happened today in Congress. Afghanistan was the subject. We had a lot of the different generals who were responsible for the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, who were all there in Congress today playing that little game of patty cake. We're going to hear from General Milley. We're going to hear from Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense. I believe we might have a clip from McKenzie. I'm not sure. And then we're going to take a look at what the White House had to do with this, because the White House and Jen Psaki came out and had to clean up a little bit of the contradictions that exist between the military complex and the White House. So we're going to take a look at all of that today. A lot of clips there, and it should be fun. We're then going to change gears a little bit. You may have been noticing that there are a lot of financial problems that the United States has. We've been printing money, spending money like it's going out of style. And so the bill is starting to come due. The U.S. debt ceiling is set to expire early in October. And so the Democrats and Janet Yellen and some people in the Fed are freaking out about this, saying that this is going to be something that leads us to a default and that the United States government is not going to be able to pay their bills. So we're going to go through that story a little bit, get a refresher on what the debt ceiling is, why it's important, and then see what the Democrats are doing here. The Republicans are being very, very hard in their line. They're saying we're not negotiating with you. And so we're going to go through that. I've got some clips from Elizabeth Warren and Rick Johnson over from Florida. We're going to see what's going on with this. There's a number of different spending bills going on. Nancy Pelosi is promising a vote here on Thursday that is sort of angering a lot of the progressives on the left because they want to spend even more money, even though we're coming up on the debt ceiling. So we're going to spend some time talking about the financial matters because it impacts every single one of us. And then lastly, in our last segment, we're going to go back and talk about New York Governor Hochul. We spent some time yesterday speaking about this woman and what's happening in New York. Yesterday, on Monday, they communicated that the vaccine mandate was going to go into effect. And if you were not vaccinated, if you are a hospital worker or somebody who is mandated by New York to go get the vaccine and you don't do it, guess what? Yeah, you're going to be fired, or there are going to be some consequences. And so that went into effect yesterday. Governor Hochul is now signing executive orders saying that the National Guard is going to be able to come in and be your doctor now. Remember when Joe Biden said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. He didn't say that if you like your doctor, we're going to fire them because they don't get vaxxed, and then the National Guard is going to come in and jab you. So that is going to be the last story. There's also a little bit of a conflict of interest there. The New York Governor Hochul, her daughter-in-law is actually a lobbyist for Big Pharma. So we're going to take a look at that and more. If you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, where there is a form that you can use to ask questions if you want to be a part of the show. The form looks like this. Take a look at that, and you can submit your questions, and we're going to do everything we can to get through those. We also have a new clips channel over here at Robert Gruler ESQ Clips, and all of the show clips, all of the different segments are going to be reposted over there. So if you're looking for that, be sure to go check that out. I wanted to get a couple super chats that we missed yesterday just because I was racing out the door, and I wanted to say shout outs to Jumpin' Jeff. He said, here is your step back. Summer 2023, Biden announces that Trump was actually duly elected. Trump is not allowed to run again, invoking the 22nd Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. That was from Jumpin' Jeff yesterday. Alex Bogey said the results are in with probable cause. There was a 10,000 vote difference. If you missed that segment, we talked about that yesterday. It's over on the Clips channel. And then Beth Coddington, I forgot to get to her yesterday, says, good evening, Dr. Robert. After seeing that photo, I had a photo on yesterday's show of me in a lab coat. She said, you just became more attractive to a lot of women. I don't know about that, Beth. I think that you're giving me far too much credit, but it was fun. If you missed that segment, those all came in yesterday. All right. And so without any further ado, let's get into the first segment. Make sure I'm queued up over here. The Joe Biden Afghanistan withdrawal decision came under some scrutiny today as many of his generals were hauled into Congress so that all of the different Congress people could pretend like they were going to do something about this. And so we're going to go through the clips. We're going to see what took place today. There was Lloyd Austin, our current Secretary of Defense. We also have General Milley was there, and I believe McKenzie was there, but I'm not sure that I clipped anything from him. And so let's start off with a headline over from the New York Times. They're telling us that there are live updates that top U.S. defense officials appeared before a Senate panel, and they're facing questions about the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Here is the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Mark Milley was there. He's chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you can recall a lot of questions for these two guys. A lot of questions. And they were hauled in front of the Senate previously. Oh, no, I'm sorry, they weren't. They actually didn't show up. If you recall, there was a different committee that Anthony Blinken showed up, and he got asked a bunch of questions about the military operations, but he's the State Department, so he doesn't know much about any of that. And now this was the question about the withdrawal. We saw it. We all saw people falling out of airplanes, falling off of landing gear. We saw an explosion kill 13 Americans. Many people are saying absolutely unnecessarily. And it's been kind of a catastrophe from start to finish. Now, the Biden administration has been really framing this out as a historic success. It was a monumental airlift, the likes of which the world has never seen before. And Joe Biden has been really backing up all of his claims sort of with a lot of fluffy, colory language. And now this is the first time for senators and many people in America to get some answers from the generals who are responsible for some of these decisions. The New York Times continues, says the Pentagon's top leadership faced sharp questions from Democrats and Republican senators about the military's role in the chaotic last several months in Afghanistan. The hearing was also the first opportunity for lawmakers to question Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, about other actions that came out during the Trump administration. And remember what he said previously, or what came out previously, was that General Milley had a conversation with Bob Woodward and I think another author talking about what happened in the Trump administration. And the big allegation there was that General Milley, who was supposed to be working for Donald Trump, he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs back during that time, allegedly was sort of running around acting like he was in charge of the whole country. He was communicating, making phone calls over to China with or without approval from the commander-in-chief, which would have been President Trump. We don't know. But the excerpts from Woodward's book seemed to indicate that maybe there was something nefarious going on there. We also heard with Milley that there was some conversations with Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi called him up and said, Donald Trump, are you all just kissing his big fat butt over there? And I didn't make that up. That's what she said. The elected U.S. House of Representatives leader says, talks like that to other generals. And so they're having conversations about invoking the 25th Amendment in a way that is totally inappropriate for somebody who is a part of the executive branch to be having with your political enemies in another co-equal branch. So all of that was the backdrop. This was the first time that people got to ask Milley about these questions because he's been hiding in the basement with Joe Biden. And he started out his statement today saying, "My loyalty to this nation, its people, and the Constitution hasn't changed and will never change as long as I have a breath to give." General Milley said in his opening statements, "I firmly believe in civilian control of the military as a bedrock principle essential to the republic. I'm committed to ensuring the military stays clear of domestic politics," which is absolutely total nonsense, right? This guy is full of baloney. We heard him previously in front of Congress, I think, talking about white rage. I want to understand, right, white rage, and this is very important to us, and I'm a military leader, and all this nonsense. We were making fun of them for a long time here because it was sort of the woke Marine Corps that we were talking about. The Marine Corps was like, drama TV. We don't engage in drama. And then he makes a video and posts it on the internet, engaging directly in the drama. We saw different Twitter accounts from official U.S. Department of Defense accounts sort of slam dunking on other Americans and posting woke-ish messages all over the place. So don't tell us, General Milley, that none of this has to do with domestic politics. He's very excited to get involved in domestic politics, and any statements to the contrary are just nonsense, as you can just clearly see by the history, all of the patterns of times where he has directly injected himself into domestic politics. So don't believe that for a second, but we're going to go through, we're going to hear from him. He's got a number of different things he said today, and Tom Cotton actually dug in a little bit. But before we get into anything about Afghanistan, any of the particulars, let's just do a quick refresher and see whether or not we recall what Joe Biden had to say about this, because Joe Biden was giving an interview with George Stephanopoulos immediately after the Afghanistan withdrawal started to deteriorate. And this was the same interview where Joe Biden said, that was 4 to 5 days ago. And it actually wasn't, right? It was like 48 hours previously when Stephanopoulos was asking him about Afghanis dropping out of the sky after hanging off of landing gear. Joe Biden was not happy in this interview. And so the real pertinent point that we want to dive in on here is about the advice that President Biden got. Now, he's going to tell us here that it was sort of a split decision, that, he's having conversations with various different people in the military, and he can't recall. Dang it. It's a bummer when you have pre-dementia or whatever's going on with him. It's a bummer that you can't remember these things, but he comes out and says specifically, nobody really told me that we should be leaving 2,500 people behind. Nobody made clear to me, the president of the United States, as best as I can recall, that we should have done something different. And so this is the baseline. This is what we're talking about. We're going to hear from Joe Biden before the hearings took place, and then we're going to compare and contrast that with what the generals remember, because they still have functional brains. Let's see what Joe Biden had to say to George Stephanopoulos.
Your top military advisors warned against withdrawing on this timeline. They wanted you to keep about 2,500 troops.
No, they didn't. It was split. That wasn't true. That wasn't true.
Oh, was it?
They didn't tell you that they wanted troops to stay?
No, not in terms of whether we were going to get out in a time frame, all troops. They didn't argue against that.
So no one told, your military advisors did not tell you, no, we should just keep 2,500 troops. It's been a stable situation for the last several years. We can do that. We can continue to do that.
No one said that to me that I can recall.
He can't recall, which is not a surprise. We all know, right? That's the one truthful thing that we can take out of that whole thing is, he doesn't recall. I believe that through and through because he doesn't seem like he's all there most of the time. So we know that, right? Nobody said to keep 2,500 troops. Nobody said that. No, nobody told me that. Not that I can recall. Okay, well, let's see what the generals have to say about this. Now, I have not listened to any of these clips. I was in a conference all day today. I saw a lot of clips out there floating around the Twitterverse, and so I clipped them. Haven't listened to them yet. We're going to listen in together. The first clip that I have is here from Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton, of course, is a senator, often has some pretty poignant questions, and he was having conversations today. I think this clip is about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. We're going to let it play out and just see what kind of got mixed up here. Here is Tom Cotton in Congress today.
General Milley, it's your testimony that you recommended 2,500 troops approximately stay in Afghanistan?
As I've said many times before this committee and other committees, I don't share my personal recommendations to the president, but I can tell you my personal opinion and my assessment if that's what you want.
Yes, please.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated gated solution.
Did you ever present that assessment personally to President Biden?
I don't discuss exactly what my conversations are with the sitting president of the Oval Office, but I can tell you what my personal opinion was, and I'm always candid.
General McKenzie, do you share that assessment?
Senator, I do share that assessment.
Did you ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
Again, I'm not going to be able to comment on those executive discussions.
Did General Miller ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
I think it would be best to ask him. I believe that his opinion was well heard.
Secretary Austin, President Biden last month in an interview with George Stephanopoulos said that no military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence in Afghanistan. Is that true?
Come on.
Senator Cotton, I believe that, well, first of all, I know the president to be an honest and forthright man.
Okay.
And secondly,
it's a simple question, Secretary Austin. He said no senior military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence behind. Is that true or not? Did these officer and General Miller's recommendations get to the president personally?
their input was received by the president and considered by the president, for sure. In terms of what they specifically recommended, Senator, as they just said, they're not going to provide what they recommended in confidence.
I mean, it sounds to me, it's shocking to me. It sounds to me like maybe their best military advice was never presented personally to the President of the United States about such a highly consequential matter.
All right, so I'm not sure I agree with that last point from Tom Cotton. Maybe they didn't present it, right? They're not going to tell you that they presented it, but presumably you would understand that these are honorable men, right? Okay, and so they are out there now saying that this was my personal opinion, and so you have to imagine that logically you can extend that one step further. If Lloyd Austin, if General McKenzie, if General Milley were all feeling this, this is my personal opinion, 2,500, 3,500 troops, you'd have to guess, right, logically, that they would be communicating that to the president. They're not going to go there and say, well, I personally believe it's 2,500 troops who should still be there, and then go to the president and then pat him on the back and say, yeah, good job, Biden, let's get the hell out of there, right? Maybe they did. Maybe they did do that. It depends how much credibility you want to give them. Now, or the benefit of the doubt. The alternative explanation here could be that they're all backtracking, right? They're all saying that, no, we wanted to get out of there. We were puffing up Joe Biden. I was also concerned about white rage. Joe Biden can get some white rage. And so General Milley's in the Oval Office, a little bit concerned about that, going back through his woke training Rolodex to see whether or not he has any de-escalation trainings, if he can change his pronouns or do something to make sure that he doesn't invoke white rage out of Joe Biden. But then, goes there and says, yeah, get him out of there. You don't need to leave anybody. The Afghanistan army can take total care of this. And then now they're seeing what a disaster this is. So they're playing catch up a little bit. They're saying, oh, no. I mean, my personal opinion was 2,500. We could have kept him there. But for whatever reason, Joe Biden didn't do that. So I think that you could say that it's essentially 343 of the different Secretary, Defense, military operational personnel who are all communicating pretty unequivocally that this was communicated to Joe Biden. And Secretary Austin specifically detailed that, says, oh, for sure, all of that went over to the White House. And then he goes, oh, Joe Biden's an honorable and, man, nobody cares about that. That's not why we're here. We're asking specific questions. Joe Biden said nobody told him to leave 2,500 troops there. Miley, did you? I can't tell you what I said, but that was my opinion at the time. Okay, great. Thanks. Next. McKenzie, you? Yeah, also my opinion, identical to that prior opinion, but I can't tell you about our specific conversations. But generally speaking, yeah, my feeling was we should leave some troops there. Goes over to Secretary Austin. He confirms it as well. Oh, yeah, all of that was communicated, but Joe Biden's very honorable, so that's why it doesn't matter. So that was taking place here today. Well done to Senator Cotton. 343 on that. And what are the consequences going to be there? Well, I don't know. It kind of depends on who you think is in the wrong. If you think that any of these secretaries, any of these generals were erroneous in their conversations are erroneous in their assessments, well, then you can go after them. But if they were providing clear data over to the White House and their clear professional military opinion that there was a better way to approach this withdrawal, and then the White House heard it all, but Joe Biden can't remember anything, so he just said, we're done over there, and made a decision regardless of their input, how do you really hold those guys accountable for that? Because the buck stops with Biden, and we'll see if anything happens there politically or of any consequence. So let's take a look at another clip. Here is Josh Hawley, and he's going here with Lloyd Austin, once again, the Secretary of Defense. And let's listen in and see what this clip has for us.
But first, before I do, Secretary Austin, I have to take issue with something you just said. I know this is an administration talking point. I've heard it out of the mouth of the press secretary and others. We are not leaving Americans behind. That was your quote of just a minute ago. With all due respect, sir, you have left, past tense, Americans behind. We have no presence any longer in Afghanistan. There are hundreds of Americans, and not just Americans generally, civilians you left behind, against the president's explicit commitment not to leave until all American citizens were out and to safety. That is not what happened. And now we have people who are desperately, frantically trying to get out of this country, coming to me, coming to members of this committee, asking for help. They can't get that help. They're stuck behind enemy lines. So please don't tell me that we're not leaving Americans behind. You left them behind. Joe Biden left them behind. And frankly, it was a disgrace.
All right, so there was no question there, which is unfortunate, but Josh Hawley went after him pretty aggressively there, right? So if you were waiting for a nice tongue lashing over to the Secretary of Defense, Josh Hawley delivered that. Now, I would have liked to have heard Austin's response to that, probably more of, Joe Biden's an honorable man and we did everything we could, but again, irrelevant. We have some other questions, some other clips. This is Marsha Blackburn, I believe who this is. She is another senator, and she was asking questions less about Afghanistan and more about Milley and some of the problems or problematic quotes, at least, that came out of the new Bob Woodward book. I believe it's called Peril. And so we saw that back when those excerpts were first released, that there were some problematic things, maybe, if you believe those quotes to be true, that General Milley was having some improper conversations with the Chinese, essentially warning them or promising to warn them about any attacks that America might be thinking about, even though there's no real evidence that that was happening. And there was further excerpts talking about Milley having specific conversations with Nancy Pelosi, which is Trump's political rival, essentially his enemy to some degree. And he's basically playing, handsy with Nancy Pelosi, both laughing over Trump's big fat butt or whatever Nancy Pelosi was talking about there. And so this is Marsha Blackburn now sort of pivoting into this conversation, and let's see what she has for us.
General Milley, yes or no to this? Did you talk to Bob Woodward or Robert Costa for their book Peril?
Woodward, yes. Costa, no.
Did you talk to Carol Leonik and Philip Rucker for their book Alone Can I Fix It?
Yes.
Did you talk to Michael Bender for his book is Frankly, We Did Win This Election, the Inside Story of How Trump Lost? Yes.
Yes.
Or no? And were you accurately represented in these books?
I haven't read any of the books, so I don't know. I've seen press reporting of it. I haven't read the book.
Let's have you read the books and then let us know if you are accurately presented
Absolutely.
and portrayed.
Happy to do that.
Senator Blackburn, we're adhering to the 5-minute rule.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing.
All right, so that was Milley. Again, not really given much there. Haven't read the books, so not much you can take away from there. Now, it would have been nice if Blackburn would have let him continue on there and said, okay, well, were you mischaracterized in those excerpts then? Can we talk about those? And so we might have a clip here, I think, of Milley, who is actually expanding on that, but not a lot of substance there either, other than Milley sort of, naturally just kind of, I haven't read it, which is a very nice dodge. Haven't read the book. She says, well, go read it and then let us know. We'll see if that happens. I doubt it. So here is one more clip from Milley, who is going to be telling us a little bit more about, I think, some of that conversation, specifically about his conversation with the Chinese. Recall this to set this up a little bit further, that the allegation was in the Woodward book that after January 6th, there was a lot of sort of tumultuous activity in the United States. And what General Milley was alleging is that other people around the world were watching what happened on January 6th, and they probably, like many people in the media, saw that guy who had the podium, and they thought, oh my gosh, America has been seized. Somebody has that podium, and because everybody on MSNBC is hyperventilating about this, that must mean that America has been taken over. And so Milley, according to the book excerpts, was sort of in hyperventilation mode because he was saying that all of America's allies were in a sort of, high alert, red alert, that maybe the entire infrastructure of the United States government is floundering and flailing, even though on January 6th, they counted the votes, the electoral votes for Joe Biden the same night because it was a stupid joke of a riot that nobody has even been charged with insurrection or treason or anything like that. And so the whole thing was kind of this big puffed up piece. It continues to be this big puffed up joke. But Milley was, very triggered on this whole thing. And so he gets on the phone, allegedly, and he's calling everybody. Oh, it's all okay here. Don't worry, I'm in charge. And one of those calls allegedly was to the Chinese, saying specifically, everything is okay here. Literally, in a previous show, we analyzed this, literally giving aid and comfort. Mr. Chinese General, I know you're concerned about this, but here, there. It's going to be okay, Mr. Chinese General. Don't you worry about this. Aid and comfort. And so he gets on the phone call and says specifically, by the way, if we're going to attack you, I'm just going to let you know. So if it's not just aid and comfort, it's actual military intelligence that the allegation was he was promising to the United States enemy back when Donald Trump was in charge. So kind of a big problem if that turns out to be true. Here is what General Milley had to say about that phone call and about that conversation.
There are processes, protocols, and procedures in place, and I repeatedly assured her that there is no chance of an illegal, unauthorized, or accidental launch. By presidential directive and Secretary of Defense directives, the chairman is part of the process to ensure the president is fully informed when determining the use of the world's deadliest weapons.
Yeah.
By law, I am not in the chain of command, and I know that. However, by presidential directive and DoD instruction, I am in the chain of communication to fulfill my legal statutory role as the president's primary military advisor. After the Speaker Pelosi call, I convened a short meeting in my office with key members of my staff to refresh all of us on the procedures which we practice daily at the action officer level. Additionally, I immediately informed Acting Secretary of Defense Miller of Speaker Pelosi's phone call. At no time was I attempting to change or influence the process, usurp authority, or insert myself in the chain of command. But I am expected, I am required to give my advice and ensure that the president is fully informed on military matters. I am submitting for the record a more detailed and unclassified memoranda that I believe you all now have, although late. And I welcome a thorough walkthrough on every single one of these events. And I'd be happy in a classified session to talk in detail about the intelligence that drove these calls. I'm also happy to make available any email, phone logs, memoranda, witnesses, or anything else you need to understand these events. My oath is to support the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I will never turn my back on that oath. I firmly believe in civilian control of the military as a bedrock principle essential to the health of this republic, and I'm committed to ensuring that the military stays clear of domestic politics. I look forward to your questions, and thank you, Chairman, for the extra time.
Okay, so a couple things. Number one, my first thought is he said that his duty is to make sure that Donald Trump is apprised, the president, the commander in chief. He said that he's very adherent to the idea that the civilians maintain control of the military and that he follows the proper chain of command. Just said he's not going to insert himself into anything that's going on. He's just sort of rallying the troops and reminding them that, there's a maniac over there, the commander in chief. And so just do what I say, in other words. And then the conversation sort of pivots to saying, I got to keep them informed. I got to keep the president apprised, provide all of the intelligence, all of that information over to the president. So the big question that we had at the original time the story broke, after the excerpts came out from Woodward, was Trump aware of any of those conversations that took place? Did he do this on his own? In the law, we call it sua sponte. It's sort of something that the court will do on its own. They just say, the defense didn't ask for this. The prosecution didn't ask for this. I just decided that I'm going to go ahead and do it. And is that something that Milley did? Did he just go through and just say, I'm just going to call these people without communicating that to the commander-in-chief? Because the commander-in-chief may not want those phone calls to be made, may not want that the Joint Chiefs of Staff to call China. And you might decide that this was the right call to make. You might take a look at this at General Milley and say, this guy's a hero. This guy is somebody out there who was averting, a Trumpian disaster to some degree. And you might feel very strongly that he did the right thing here. But you got to ask yourself if that standard is acceptable to you. Would this be okay if some general did the same thing to Joe Biden? I would argue, no, absolutely not. It wouldn't be. Even though Joe Biden is basically non-existent, he's a sort of a placeholder president, I still would say it's not appropriate. We have a constitutional republic that follows the rules, and anytime somebody breaches those protocols, that's a big problem, regardless of who it is. If you don't like Joe Biden, put Barack Obama in there. What if his Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military came out and was sort of acting nefariously behind his back? Everybody here, rightfully so, would lose their minds over that because it is not appropriate. It's not supposed to go that way. That's why we have certain rules and things in place. Now, the other thing I noticed in that clip was that Milley was talking specifically, I'll give you anything you need. I'll give you emails. I'll give you phone logs. Did you hear him say that? Logs specifically. The logs would be great. And that you can have conversations about why you made those calls in a confidential session. It's probably going to be a lot of the same garbage we've already heard, that Donald Trump was in a dark depression. He was in a dark spot that the media continues to talk about. And he's going to use that as the basis for his usurpation of that administration, even though there's nothing in the Constitution or any rule of law, as far as I can tell, outside of the 25th Amendment that would justify taking that power away from the commander-in-chief. And we remember that Nancy Pelosi was doing cartwheels trying to get the rest of the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment after January 6th, and they didn't do that. Why? Well, because apparently whatever the situation was there, didn't necessitate that type of activity. So General Milley could have resigned if he was unhappy with what was going on. He could have come out publicly calling for the 25th Amendment or any of those things. He didn't do that. He just started to sort of act on his own accord, under his own volition, outside of the proper chain of command, in my opinion. So I would really like to see the transcripts here. He says he's going to get us phone calls and emails and confidential records. What was the transcript? And then we can compare that with what Donald Trump knew or anybody sort of on the other side of this equation. They can come out and say, no, we didn't have any idea that General Milley, the Joint Chiefs, was telling the Chinese counterparts that he's going to alert them to a surprise attack from the United States, if that is in fact in the transcript, which I would like to see. But he didn't include that in his little list of things that he's willing to share, not the transcript. Everything else seems to be fair game. So we have some interesting things happening during the Senate hearing today. And after it was done, of course, a lot of interesting tidbits came out. The first one being, of course, that 3 of the senior military advisors to the president, General McKenzie, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and General Milley, all came out and said our personal opinions essentially were that we should leave 2,500 troops there, or arguably do something other than what happened. And Secretary Austin explicitly said that this information was in fact communicated to Joe Biden. And he made a different decision. And so the press now is asking those questions. Hey, they're going, well, this is interesting, because on George Stephanopoulos' show, President Biden said nobody told him about that. He doesn't recall. But now 343 people are all saying that it was communicated to him. So Jen Psaki's got to clean this up a little bit. Let's see how she did that today during the White House press briefing. Here is a clip from some reporter asking her this question.
The president, that seems to be the disconnect between that and how the president described the advice from his military advisors in that ABC interview 6 or 7 weeks ago when he said he denied the Pentagon wanted to continue the American troop presence there. So did the president mislead the American public about the advice of his military advisors?
Well, let me give you a couple of specifics from the actual transcript, because I know it's been shorthanded a bit, no malintent, but The question asked by George Stephanopoulos was, but your top military advisors warned against withdrawing on this timeline. They wanted you to keep about 2,500 troops. The president said, no, they didn't. It was split. That wasn't true. That wasn't true. It was split. I think that's a pretty key part of that phrasing there. Yeah. Later on, George Stephanopoulos said, so no one told your military advisors did not tell you, quote, no, we should just keep 2,500 troops. It's been a stable situation for the last several years. We can do that. We can continue to do that. No one said that to me that I can recall. I would note today in the testimony that was given by Secretary Austin, by General Milley, they made clear, Secretary Austin specifically said, if you stayed there at a forced posture of 2,500, certainly you'd be in a fight with the Taliban and you'd have to reinforce. So what should everybody take from that? There was a range of viewpoints, as was evidenced by their testimony today, that were presented to the president, that were presented to his national security team, as would be expected, as he asked for. He asked for a clear-eyed, didn't ask them not to sugarcoat it, what their recommendations were. It was also clear to him that that would not be a long-standing recommendation, that there would need to be an escalation, an increase in troop numbers. It would also mean war with the Taliban, and it would also mean the potential loss of casualties. The president was just not willing to make that decision. He didn't think it was in the interest of the American people or the interest of our troops.
I'm sure some of my colleagues will have a couple of follow-ups on that. I just wanted to get to a couple of different topics.
Sure.
On the reconciliation negotiations.
All right, so they go into reconciliation next, but a couple things on that. So that's not actually a terrible answer, and it's pretty accurate. Joe Biden did say that. No, it was split. It was split. And I don't recall anybody telling me about, whatever the follow-up there was about the 2,500 leaving those troops behind. Jen Psaki comes out, and now she's sort of dividing the room a little bit. So the big question is, who are those other people who are on the other side of the split decision? Because he's running out of generals. We've been hearing a lot from Milley, been hearing a lot from McKenzie, been hearing a lot from Austin. And we just heard from them in Congress today that their recommendation, we don't know that specifically, right? We don't know what they told the president, but we know from their testimony today that their opinion was, personal opinion, which you would imagine would be communicated to the president, because these are honest people, right? They're not going to lie to the president. They're not going to have a personal position and then tell the president something differently. That would be dishonest, and they're not dishonest people. So they're going to go out now and say, my personal opinion was this, but I can't tell you what I communicated to the president. But they're kind of the three big names that you hear about all the time. Joint Chiefs, Secretary of Defense, and then General McKenzie, the guy who was actually running the operations, the guy who had to break the news to all of America that, 13 people were killed, and also had to break the news that, we drone struck an entire family. Remember when Joe Biden came out and ISIS-K, we got him. No, we didn't. It was a family of kids, and they're all dead now. So McKenzie was the person who had to complete this operation, and he was backed up, according to their testimony, by both Milley and Austin. So, okay, that's fine. There was a split decision. Sounds like all of that data went over to the White House, landed on Joe Biden's desk, even though he can't recall it. But he had some other people on the other side who were saying, we don't need to leave anybody. Just get rid of Bagram Air Base. Also, we can leave Kabul. The Afghan army, as Joe Biden said a number of times, is purely competent. And we're never going to see a situation where people are being air evac'd out of an embassy. That's not going to happen because they have 300,000 troops in Afghanistan that all, I guess, joined the Taliban in a matter of minutes. So we know there was a very big decision point somewhere. So the question is, if it's not Austin, Secretary Austin, if it's not McKenzie, if it's not Milley, well, who the hell is on the other side? Who else is advising you that all this is going to go according to plan? Who is on the split decision the other direction? Good question. Let's see if Jen Psaki had anything to share with us there.
I'll come around to you.
Back on Afghanistan, the president said his military commanders were split. We now know that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, the head of CENTCOM, General McKenzie, and the commander on the ground, General Miller, all recommended that the president keep 2,500 troops. So who in his military advisors told him it'd be fine to pull everybody out?
Like, I'm not going to get in specific details
of course.
Who recommended what, but I would reiterate a little bit of what I conveyed before. which is that there were recommendations made by a range of his advisors, something he welcomed, something he asked them to come to him clear-eyed about, to give him candid advice. What is also clear, though, and I'd also note again, what Secretary Austin said today, is that was not going to be a sustainable over the long-term troop presence. We were always going to look at escalating the numbers, at potentially going back to war with the Taliban, at risking casualties. That was not a decision the president was going to make. But of course, he welcomes advice. He welcomed advice. Ultimately, it's up to the commander-in-chief to make a decision. He made a decision it was time to end a 20-year war.
But you are saying here that military advisors to the president said it was okay to pull all the troops out, that it'd be fine.
That's not what I said. What I said was they recommended, I think we should not dumb this down for anybody here. We're talking about the initial phase post-May 1. We're not talking about long-term recommendations. There was no one who said 5 years from now we could have 2,500 troops and that would be sustainable. And I think that's important for people to know and to understand. It's also important to note that the risks we were talking about here were the possibility, the likelihood of increasing a troop presence, which we now know to absolutely have been the reality, given it required 6,000 troops to just protect the airport, something we now know.
But the president pulled all U.S. troops out. You are saying that there were military commanders who advised him that that was a good idea to pull all American troops out, and that General Milley, General McKenzie, General Miller, they said something else. But the president's top military advisors, others we won't name.
Who are they?
Sure, we can pull everyone out.
That's not how these conversations go. It's a risk assessment for every president about what is in the interest of the United States of America, our military, and our national interests. And if we had kept 2,500 troops there, we would have increased the number of troops, we would have been at war with the Taliban, we would have had more U.S. casualties. That was a reality everybody was clear-eyed about. There are some, as is evidenced by people testifying today, who felt we should have still done that. That is not the decision the president made. It's up to the commander-in-chief to make those decisions.
Well, okay, which I agree with, right? That's the point. That's what we're trying to get to. That's exactly why he asked that question. Yes, we want to know specifically who was advising the president to make those decisions. He said it was a split decision. Jen Psaki came out. It's a split decision. And so the reporter, to his credit, goes out and says specifically, okay, we have all of the people on this side of the conversation, a lot of very sophisticated people, to use their language, who said that this was not appropriate. Whatever the current plan was to just drop people out of airplanes, that's not a good look. And so 2,500, 3,500 troops would have been pertinent to leave behind. We have a whole bucket of people that are in that category. And guess what happens? When you know who they are, you get accountability, you get transparency. You get to haul those people in front of Congress. Whether it's going to do anything or not, you can haul them into Congress and you can ask them some questions. And if you want to impeach one of them or you want to demand resignations for one of them, you have a name. You have somebody who's accountable for their advice. And now we don't know who those other people are. We don't know if there was another military advisor or somebody on the other side of the equation, because Jen Psaki says it's not important to know who those people are. The commander-in-chief is the person who's ultimately responsible for this. Yeah, we know that. And we want to know if there were other people who gave him advice to make that decision, because we have a pretty strong idea that the rest of the military apparatus was going the other direction. Now, we want some clarity on that. And listen, if Joe Biden came out and said specifically, I don't care what any single military person says, we're getting out of there. That's a different standard, right? That's a different thing. And you might say, that's great, right? Nobody wanted to be in Afghanistan anyways. So they ended a 20-year war. But okay, great. That's fine, Joe. But you said that there was a whole separate contingent of the military that gave you advice that this was all going to go well. Guess what? It didn't go well. The American people want some answers. 13 Americans were killed. A whole family was drone struck during the exit. And we have a lot of doubt about the military and about the commander-in-chief. Whether or not he's listening to advice, whether or not he's competent, whether or not he's capable of leading the country. We've got questions about it. That's why there are congressional hearings. That's why even Democratic senators like Bob Menendez over from New Mexico have said specifically that they want answers because people are dead. And it's not appropriate for the White House to just say, well, other advisors were split. I don't want to get into the details. That's not how this works. That's why we have congressional hearings, and there is oversight for a lot of these things, like we saw today. Guess what? Only one side showed up. It was the Leave 2,500 troops behind to secure the rest of the exit. And the other people are just not accountable. No transparency whatsoever. And so are there going to be any consequences for any of these military blunders? No, because if you're a general, if you're somebody who's an elected official, if you're in a cabinet position, if you've been nominated and confirmed to be the Secretary of Defense, you are immune from any real repercussions. But if you are just a lowly military lieutenant, well, then you don't get to say anything. Otherwise, you get thrown in the brig. This is a clipping over from Task and Purpose. They say that the Marine officer who blasted leaders over Afghanistan is now in the brig. We played this. This was from Stuart Scheller. He was in the armed services, and he gained notoriety back on August 26. He posted a video on Facebook, and he accused senior military leaders of shirking their responsibilities. I think we played this on this show. He said that people are upset because their senior leaders let them down. None of them are raising their hands and accepting responsibility. Well, he spoke out, and now he's in the brig. The father came out and said his son is expected to appear before a military hearing on Thursday. The military apparently had a gag order on him that he violated. They asked him not to speak. He did, and so they incarcerated him. They say they don't know what to do with him. Military came out. They said Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller is currently in pre-trial confinement at the regional brig for the Marine Corps. He's aboard the Marine Corps base camp under Article 32 preliminary hearings. The time, date, and location of the proceedings has not been determined, and he's going to be afforded all due process. And so this guy's essentially going to be a martyr, right, for his position, and he's now in custody. So if you speak out against the military blunder, right, the military is going to respond accordingly, but not if you botch a military operation that leaves 13 Americans dead. All you do at that point then is you go in front of Congress, and you let a couple senators ask you some hard questions, and you give them a bunch of, sort of ornery military responses like, I didn't read the book. And then what happens? Nothing. You go back to work the next day, and you get America involved in another foreign entanglement that results in more dead Americans. So that is the current state of affairs here in the United States. Isn't that just lovely? That was the military Senate hearing that took place today. Let's see what you have to say about this. Questions coming in hot from over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Let's see who we have here. We have Geomancy Games, who is over on YouTube, says, massive headache today, laying down and listening. Even with all this questioning, will anyone be held accountable or serve jail? Will these insane, evil people just move on to the next story in a week? I think that's going to be the case. We've got 3 more years of Joe Biden. There's a lot of other things to screw up, and Afghanistan's not going to look so bad. Free Speech Unleashed is here, says, I watched the first session of the hearing today. All those generals did was stumble over covering for Biden's poor decisions and not abiding by their advice. However, they both made a point to throw Trump under the bus by saying that things would have been better if Trump had followed what they advised. Yeah, so it all goes back to Donald Trump. Anytime that anybody can get a chance to dunk on him, they'll do it. We have Joey Bondalero says, hey, Rob, this comment came through the locals chat. Says, keep me and my son in your thoughts. Tomorrow night, I will be homeless, living in cars. Mine damaged cars from July 22nd is still waiting from a corner panel from Korea. Wondering if you'd be all right with your locals community organizing a fundraiser for a patron going through some hard times. Yeah, I have no problems with any of that, right? I mean, I don't have any issues supporting anybody in our community. And we're gonna be covering some of the other stories from other people going through some hardships with the hopes of lending them some love and support. So I'm terribly sorry to hear that that's happening, but yes, anything I can do to help, I'm in, and I mean that genuinely. Let me know. So that was from Joey Bondalero. Thank you, Joey. We have another one here from Monster One. Did you just call Milley honorable? The same China spy Milley? I don't know what I said. I might have said it. I don't know. We have another one from Deadmau5 says, America is back, baby, with a YouTube link. Let's see what this is. I got to be careful playing some of the YouTube stuff because of copyrights and things like that. Let's see what this is. 6-second clip. I don't know what that was, but that was from Deadmau5. Okay, so a kid said something and then cried. Thank you, Deadmau. We have Peely Wally says, hey, Rob, what another great stream that was. Let me get rid of that YouTube. Hey, Rob, what another great stream that was yesterday. I watched it back earlier today. As for Joe Biden, an honorable man, I might be Mary Poppins then. That's from Peely Wally. Good to see you, Peely. And thanks for the love. We have Nadar says, I believe Milley said, I don't share my personal opinion with the president. The way he phrased that seems to me that he didn't say to Biden, but he definitely thought about it. I don't know. Yeah, so it's very clever, right? He's using the executive privilege. I can't tell you about our private conversations, but I personally believe this, okay? So one could logically presume that he would have communicated his personal position over to the president, but you can't know that for sure because he's not answering that very, very pertinent question. We have another one here from John Halgren. Says, I missed the hearing. Did anyone ask him why he called the Chi-Coms? So I didn't watch the whole thing. I was in a conference all day, but in that clip that we played, he sort of said that, there are standard operating procedures, and I do those things as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in order to, act on behalf of the president. I wasn't trying to insert myself into the chain of command. I was doing all of this stuff just to remind everybody how this all works. And so the big question that I have, of course, is the transcript. What was in the transcript? And did Donald Trump specifically know about that phone call? Did he authorize it? Was he aware of it? Would he have approved it? Probably not. And I think that is where the problem is. That's the disconnect. But I want to see the transcripts, which are probably never going to be released because they're probably pretty damn bad. All right, Google is loading up. We have another one here from 3 Girlies. Says Psaki said he didn't want to risk the troops, but he had 13 of them killed and 20 injured. He risked the troops by doing what he did. He would have risked less if he had put more troops in, gotten everyone out like he was supposed to do. I'm so tired of the lie that Biden didn't want to risk the troops. We did have more American troop casualties. We are still at war with the Taliban. Sometimes I swear she doesn't even hear herself think before it comes flying out of her lying mouth. She is just a spinster, right? I mean, that's all these press people do is they spin for a year, then they go and they write a book, and then they go on the talk shows, right? And that's all they do. So they don't really care about communicating the truth. They're out there almost like a fighter, right? They're just out there sort of engaging. Doesn't matter who the opponent is. Doesn't matter what the issue is. And look, a lot of lawyers are like this, right? They just pick up any issue. I'll argue anything, right? And they just go and do it. Doesn't matter what the crime was. Doesn't matter what the background was. They just go and argue. And so this is happening now on Jen Psaki's behalf. Now, as a criminal defense attorney, right, I think that the reason I'm capable of going and arguing for anybody regardless of the crime is because I believe in things like the presumption of innocence, like due process, like the right to counsel, and the burden of proof, and all of these different very important concrete examples. To me, it doesn't matter what the person did. They may be a child, somebody who injures children or something to that effect, but they still deserve those fundamental principles. Because if we give them up for any one contingent of society, well, then it just erodes for everybody else. But when we go out and engage in battle, it's based in principle, at least for me and what we do at our office. But Jen Psaki, I'm not really sure what she's adhering to, other than just fighting for an administration regardless of what happens. She'll come out there, there could be, 50 Afghanis dropping out of planes, and she's going to come and spin that as a positive thing. So that's her job. That's what she's, hired to do. And I think it's dishonest as hell, but that's the system that we live in. Good to see you, 3 Girlies. We have another one over here from Peely Wally. Says, Joe Biden only needs advice from one man and a very, very clever man. That man, Hunter Biden, the smartest man that Joe Biden knows. Peely says, what a mess. Good to see you. We have another one here from Darb is in the house. Says, I still agree with the choice to pull him out, but it should have just been done under Trump's original agreement with the Taliban, not on 9/11, so Joe could take a political win for Trump. And Donald Trump actually released a statement on this, on what his strategy was, and it made pretty good sense to me. It was something like, bomb the hell out of them, make sure that they can't encroach on the airspace, evacuate all Americans first, and then leave the military last as you're continuing to blast them back into a safe zone. And so you go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Little different than what we saw from the Biden administration. Another one here is from The Last Villain. Says, now we know why we didn't hear from them earlier. They had to plot how not to expose Joe Biden's obvious lies. The most transparent administration in history, he says. Seems like nominees for the Supreme Court being asked how they will rule on Roe. Same non-answer to questions, super unhelpful and disingenuous. Yeah, it's just a spectacle at this point. It's just a show. The Republicans are going to go in there and scold all of them. Oh, 2,500 and you and 25. Okay, great. Well, guess what? When the Republicans are in charge, are there going to be any consequences? Are they going to do anything about it? Or are they just going to try to score some political points so that they can post some stuff on Twitter? I think it's the latter. We have Admiral General Havatz al-Adin of the Republic of Wadaya, who's here. Says, I was the other general. They have to hide me because the Clintons think I'm dead. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's I'm glad you're here there, though. Not dead. Clintons are pretty good at that. We have Mustang Jeff says, don't understand why these two aren't charged with treason. They barely know where they are from their answers. That's from Mustang Jeff. And two more before we jump out of here. We've got Ghost Gunner says, Rob, naive of you to think they're going to get in another foreign entanglement. They're coming for libertarians, domestic terrorists and white supremacists. I can't keep it straight anymore. Anyways, key you brass stacks high. Don't know what that last sentence means, but you're absolutely right about that, right? We've talked a lot about this. Homegrown violent extremism, domestic violent extremism. I think we have racial and ethnic violent extremists, and we have just all different categories of everything. So if you think you're immune from that, if you basically have any opinion that is anti-establishment in any way, shape, or form, you're kind of a terrorist now. Sorry. That's the new America that we live in, because Joe Biden said it's one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue facing America. Not rising inflation, not anything that has to do with economic problems, nothing to do with COVID, white racists. Okay, got it. So we're going to see a lot more of that. Yeah, why would they go fight with China when they're just going to go fight with half the American population? They're already doing that, by the way, with vaccines. And we're going to hear in our third segment that Governor Hochul from New York is now basically authorizing the National Guard to be your doctor. So that's fun. We have NY Renal MD in the house. Says, anyone notice that every president allows Bob Woodward unprecedented access to his inner circle? They keep talking to him. Can't they see it's always a problem? I'm not sure how he gets access to people, but he does write a lot of books. Monster One says, Jen Psaki on the Afghans falling. I take offense to the framing of falling Afghans. We were making ground art. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. That's just the worst. But also, yeah, terrible. Osak says, I wish they would save us all some time and just come out, give us the finger and call it a day, which is kind of what they're doing to some degree. Thank you for that, Osak and the locals community. You guys are amazing. Over on YouTube, we had a super chat come in from Clifford Barnes. Says, methinks Jen Psaki should be selling fertilizer, as every time she opens her mouth, I have flashbacks to cleaning out the hog barn when I was a kid. So that is from Clifford Barnes. Thank you for that super chat, Clifford Barnes. I appreciate you being here. And that, my friends, is it for that segment. All right. So we've got another segment. We got to talk about some other serious business coming up. That's right. The U.S. government is in a little bit of a precarious financial predicament, shall we say. A lot of money is being spent and printed. The printing machines in super high speed, going wild. And the U.S. government is still running out of it. The U.S. debt ceiling is about to get hit. Let's take a look at this chart over from a Bloomberg terminal. Somebody posted this over on Twitter, and you can see what's going on here. The U.S. debt limit you're going to see is in yellow, and it is periodically raised from time to time. And the U.S. total debt is tracking it naturally, right? It's sort of like extending your credit card bill. If you keep maxing out your credit card and you keep raising your limit, well, you're just going to keep spending what you're allowed to spend. And so here in yellow, the U.S. continues to raise its debt limit. We're now at $28 trillion in total U.S. debt, and the U.S. just keeps spending and spending and spending away. You can see that these have just gone up dramatically since the 1970s, up and up and up and up and up. They just keep printing money. They keep spending money that they don't have, and they need to fund it from somewhere. If AOC comes out and says, we need $3.5 trillion to solve global warming in this country, well, where does that money come from? Because we have deficits in this country. We spend more than we collect. And so who funds those spending obligations? Well, we take it out. We just go swipe the credit card. And sometimes we can't raise our credit card debt ceiling. They're not going to give you any more allowance. So the U.S. government has to figure out what to do about that. And you can see that there's a connection here at the top of this. The total debt is now hitting the debt ceiling, the debt limit. And so there's a big battle taking place about whether or not this is going to, wreck America. Let's take a quick look and a reminder about what the debt limit is, because I know some of these concepts are a little bit difficult to sort of wrap your head around, especially when there's just nothing but money spending and money printing and infrastructure bills and all of the other trillions of dollars that have been printed over the last 18 months or so. It's really hard to keep track of this. And so we kind of have a number of different things going on right now. We have a $1 trillion infrastructure deal that the Senate Republicans agreed to, that the House more or less agreed to. And so that's just a $1 trillion deal. This is Biden's infrastructure plan. We also have a $3.5 trillion domestic policy. This is the tax package that many progressives in the House want. And for a long time, they've been saying that we're not going to pass the infrastructure deal unless you also give us the $3.5 trillion domestic deal. So now we're talking about $4.5 trillion that are sort of floating around. And that is not funded. They don't have any money for that. Now, Joe Biden says it's going to cost you $0 and all of that stuff, but we're Americans. We know that you really can't just create money, even though they do. But he's saying it's not going to cost anything. But the point here is a lot of spending. But that's not what we're talking about. Any of those. We're talking about just the debt limit. These are for obligations that America has already committed to, that America can't pay for. So the debt limit, according to the New York Times, it's a cap on the total amount of money that the federal government is authorized to borrow to fulfill its financial obligations. U.S. runs on deficit, so it must borrow huge sums of money to pay its bills. That includes things for Social Security, national debt, interest on the national debt. So when you borrow money, when you swipe your credit card, right, they're giving you money on credit, and you pay interest on that. You're going to pay a certain amount back, and you're typically going to pay interest for that. Same thing's happening here. The U.S. has been just swiping credit cards all over the place, so a huge portion of the annual budget is going to pay the interest on that debt. Not good. Must borrow huge sums of money for that. While the debt ceiling debate is often calling on lawmakers to cut back on government spending, no, it doesn't do that. It just simply allows the U.S. to finance existing obligations. So the U.S. technically hit its debt limit at the end of July, following a 2-year extension that Congress agreed to in 2019. But Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who we're going to hear from here in a minute, has been using extraordinary measures since then to delay a default. Bipartisan Policy Center now estimates the Treasury is really going to run out of cash somewhere between October 15th and November 4th. But it's difficult to project the X date because of all the pandemic relief money that the government is distributing and the uncertainty surrounding how much tax revenue is going to be coming in this fall. So they have no idea what they're doing. They've just been printing money hand over fist. A couple billion, 100 billion here, 100 billion there. Doesn't even matter. It's just paper. So who cares? And that's what the debt ceiling is. Now, Janet Yellen is saying this is a very, very big problem. She says that the U.S. in October is going to struggle to pay the bills if the debt limit isn't raised. On a Senate hearing with her and Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve chair, they both came out and publicly pressed lawmakers to take action to raise the debt ceiling or to suspend the nation's borrowing cap. So they're asking now for no debt limit. Just suspend the cap. Just get rid of it. Your credit card, you maxed your credit card out. It's really frustrating that you can't continue to spend money. Now, the credit card company is going to say, we're not raising your limit because you are fiscally irresponsible and we want to get paid. But the U.S. government, that doesn't matter to them. They don't care. It's their money. They just print as much of it as they want. And so they're going to ask now that happens. The Federal Reserve is going to come out, tell the official Congress people, we're going to be in big trouble unless you do this. Here's what Janet Yellen had to say about it today.
It is imperative that Congress address the debt limit. If not, our current estimate is that Treasury will likely exhaust its extraordinary measures by October 18th. At that point, we expect Treasury would be left with very limited resources that would be depleted quickly. America would default for the first time in history. The full faith and credit of the United States would be impaired, and our country would likely face a financial crisis and economic recession as a result.
Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, she's really concerned about that U.S. credibility, huh? Yeah, okay. So that's what Janet Yellen has to say. Okay, so now let's take a look about what Congress is doing here. Now, that was the debt ceiling. We're going to see what the Republicans have to say about that in a minute, but let's do a little bit of a detour and see what's happening with those other spending bills. So the U.S. is out of money, like out of it. We just heard from Janet Yellen, can't pay our bills. U.S. is going to default, going to cause a catastrophic financial recession, whatever. And so you would imagine that many people in Congress might go, oh man, this is a problem. Maybe we should stop spending money that we don't have. Is that happening? No, of course it isn't. So Pelosi is going to be planning on a vote for another infrastructure bill coming up this week. Says that this is a safety net bill. We say that the move amounted to a gamble, that liberals who have balked at allowing the infrastructure bill to move on its own, they're going to have to take a vote on it this Thursday. And so to frame this out a little bit, Speaker Nancy Pelosi signaled to Democrats on Monday that she would push ahead with the vote this week on a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. So you can see here that in this chart, not looking good. We're out of money, but that's okay. They're going to jam through another $1 trillion infrastructure bill, working to salvage President Biden's agenda in Congress, even as the party remains divided over the broad social safety net bill. Progressive lawmakers like AOC, she's been screaming about this, have long warned that they would not vote on this infrastructure bill, the $1 trillion bill, until a far more expansive $3.5 trillion domestic policy tax package also cleared the chamber. So she wants $4.5 trillion. But in private remarks to her caucus on Monday evening, Pelosi effectively decoupled the two bills, saying the Democrats needed much more time to resolve their differences on the social plan. This is now a gamble that the liberals who balked at allowing the infrastructure bill to move on its own would support it on Thursday. So we don't really know what's going to happen on Thursday. Many progressives have said, we're not going to vote yes on infrastructure unless you give us the $3.5 trillion. That's not happening, apparently. But Nancy Pelosi's sort of calling their bluff. She's going to put that up for a vote, and we'll see who decides on what. And because Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats generally fall in line, we'll see. Now, the Daily Caller is telling us what the Republicans are doing here. The Republicans are stomping their feet about this. And on Monday, they filibustered the Democrats' bill to fund the government. So again, this is not the $4.5 trillion that the Democrats want. This is just to pay the bills. On Monday, there was a proposal that they could increase the debt limit. Republicans filibustered. They said not going to happen. Republicans vowed for weeks to oppose a debt ceiling increase, urged the Democrats to put the provision in their filibuster-proof $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. But Democrats have refused to do so because their bill's failure seems inevitable. Congress has now just 3 days to pass a new funding bill to avoid a government shutdown that's scheduled to begin this Friday at midnight. The government's going to shut down? One can only hope. It would be a good start if they just kind of went away. Speaking on the Senate floor ahead of the 48-50 vote, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer screamed at Republicans, said they're throwing the country towards unnecessarily and avoidable disaster. He changed his vote to no at the last second, allowing him to bring the funding bill back up at a later date. He said if Republicans follow through with their plans to vote no, they will be on record deliberately sabotaging our country's ability to pay the bills, and it's likely causing the first ever default in American history. By blocking an extension of the debt limit, Republicans will solidify themselves for a long time as the party of default. So Chuck Schumer's unhappy about that. We have Republicans, Mitch McConnell, Cocaine Mitch, according to one of his primary opponents, Minority Leader now says, no, this is the Democrats' fault, saying they knew this was going to be the end result. They could easily pass a government funding bill with overwhelming bipartisan support to avoid a shutdown. McConnell comes out and says, we're going to support a clean, continuing resolution that's going to prevent a government shutdown. We're going to get disaster relief to Louisiana. We're going to vet Afghan refugees properly. We're going to support the Iron Dome, of course, for Israel. Republicans spring into action anytime that anything in Israel needs to be funded, boom, done. The entire U.S. government jumps into alignment to get that done. Republicans' objections stem from the Democrats' budget itself. If they have the power and are planning on pushing it through Congress without GOP input, then they should be responsible for raising it on their own. Bipartisanship, says McConnell, is not a light switch that Democrats can flip on when they need to borrow money and then switch off when they want to spend the money. The debt suspension that expired in August covered all the debt that had been accumulated to that point. This is an argument about the future. And so that's from Mitch McConnell. And so the Democrats are saying, listen, Republicans, you raised the debt limit a bunch of times for Donald Trump. You do this when your people are in power. So why don't you do it for us? Well, because it's partisan politics. That's an obvious answer. But Mitch McConnell's response to that is necessarily, well, Democrats, you're in charge. You could easily come up with a clean bill. You have refused to do that. You've locked the GOP out from any decision making. And so if you want to pass this increase in the debt ceiling, you're on your own. Good luck to you. And so that's sort of where the divide is. We have a couple clips here. Here is Elizabeth Warren, unhappy about this, as she typically is. Let's listen to see what she has to say.
It's time to call the Republicans out over this. Are you kidding me on the debt ceiling? When Donald Trump was president and needed to raise the debt ceiling over and over, Democrats said, yep, we get it. And what are we trying to raise the debt ceiling for now? To cover the debts that were incurred during the Trump administration. And the Republicans want to turn around and play political games with that. They want to threaten to blow up our entire economy and actually the world economy over that. They want to throw our good name in the toilet for their political gains. No, where I am right now is to call out the Republicans who are saying that they are going to behave so irresponsibly as not to vote to increase the debt limit. You know, keep in mind, this is not about future spending. This is about honoring the promises we made back during the Trump administration.
Okay, so Elizabeth, very unhappy about it. Call the Republicans. Okay, call them out. Who cares? Call them out. Yeah, the United States is going to fail because the government just can't keep spending like lunatics. And so the solution here is to, no real solution about fiscal responsibility at all. It's just, hey, we spent like drunken sailors when the Republicans are in charge, and now we're in charge. So you should be allowing us to spend like drunken sailors. Nothing against drunken sailors, but that's not what this is. This isn't a boat in the ocean. This is the United States Congress. And so typically, the game goes this way. Democrats are in charge. They get to ransack the Treasury. They get to sort of enrich themselves, pay all the political favors to everybody out there in the world. And then that's sort of acceptable to the Washington elite establishment class. The Democrats get their 4 years at the trough. Then it goes back over to the Republicans. The Republicans get their 4 years at the trough. They turn into big fat pigs, just like the Democrats do, and they kick it back and forth. And around we go. It's our turn. Now it's your turn. Now it's our turn. Now it's your turn. And so here we are again, and the Democrats are stomping their feet because it's their turn, and the Republicans aren't playing ball. And so we'll see what happens, right? This happens every single 2 years, I think. There's always a government shutdown. There's always this sort of screeching that comes out of Congress about people saying, it's the end of America. The whole world's going to fail because we can't continue to print and spend money. Like everybody's lives is rolling around whatever the federal government does. Okay, and by the way, they've already wrecked the economy. They've already wrecked supply chains. They've already ruined the currency beyond its problems before the pandemic. Inflation's going up through the roof. Supply chains are broken all across the country. The U.S. government is now going to be firing people from their jobs over the vaccine mandates, or let's say incentivizing employers to fire them. And so the whole system that she's talking about saving is already crumbling all around you. I mean, look around, Elizabeth Warren. So the fact that the U.S. government now is also not able to continue to print money or to spend money that they don't have, it's going to cause a problem. Have you looked around the world? Joe Biden came out and said there's something like 80 million Americans who are now under the microscope of the federal government because of vaccine mandates. So everything's pretty much wrecked at this point. And so, yeah, maybe you don't get to continue to spend like a lunatic. Here is another senator. This is Rick Scott from Florida, sort of, I think, standing in the same place as Elizabeth Warren. You know, the media just sets up a camera. Elizabeth, your turn. Okay, Rick Scott, your turn. Okay, other moron congressperson, your turn. Okay, dummy, over here, your turn. And they just sort of shuffle them through like in an assembly line. Here is Rick Scott.
And so, but the Democrats want to suspend the debt ceiling so nobody has to vote on a number. That's all they care. That's all they want. They don't want to be responsible. They want to tell the public the truth. They are bankrupting this country and causing significant inflation for the poorest families in this country. It's disgusting what the Democrats are doing right now.
All right, so that's Rick Scott. Yeah, okay, yeah. So, okay, thanks, Rick. Yeah, you guys were in charge some time ago. You didn't do anything any better, quite frankly. So, all right. So they're both sides of the same coin. It's this fake little opposition thing that they set up. Elizabeth Warren comes out. I'm outraged. We have Rick Scott comes out. I'm outraged. Okay. Both of you people are going to increase the spending. The U.S. is not going to default. Everything's going to be just fine. And they're going to continue to make much ado about nothing because we all know that they're both two sides of the same coin, as far as I can tell. It's just the Democrats are in charge right now. All right. So now we have Fed Powell warning Congress that inflation pressures, they could last longer than expected. Well, that's weird because a couple months ago, Jerome Powell and all of the other morons who are managing the financial situation are all talking about transitory inflation. Remember that? It's all transitory. These are just supply chain problems. The reason why food prices are going up is because they couldn't ship it or something like that. It has nothing to do with the trillions of dollars that have been printed. It has everything to do with the truckers can't get the food delivered quickly enough. Turns out they were lying, which is exactly what we've been talking about for months now. Federal Chairman Jerome Powell warns Congress inflation pressures could last longer than expected, said that he cautioned that the causes of the recent rise in inflation may last longer than anticipated. The remarks are part of mandated testimony that Powell must give to Congress regarding the Fed's economic response to COVID-19. Goes on, says Jerome Powell delivered remarks on Tuesday, cautioned Washington legislators that the cause in rise in inflation may last longer than anticipated. Gave a speech to the banking committee, said that the central bank is going to continue to strengthen economic growth, but it's been met with upward price pressures, caused by supply chain bottlenecks and other factors. What are those other factors? Well, trillions in new printing. Inflation is elevated, will likely remain so in the coming months before moderating, said Powell. As the economy continues to reopen and spending rebounds, we are seeing upward pressures on prices, particularly due to supply chain bottlenecks. These effects have been larger and longer lasting than anticipated, but they will abate. And as they do, inflation is expected to drop back down to our longer run 2% goal. So I don't know who he's talking to, but I think most people actually did anticipate inflation going up and that it was not going to be as transitory as many people in this administration would want you to believe. Because listen, if inflation is a real big problem, printing $4.5 trillion additional dollars for infrastructure and for domestic policy, that doesn't help the inflation problem, does it? And so they've been playing both sides of this. They want all this extra money. They can't afford any of it, so it's all going to be borrowed. But it's going to be part of Biden's domestic agenda. Never mind inflation. Print, 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 print. Joe Biden thinks that spending is what's going to build him a legacy, and he's doing a lot of it. Now the Federal Reserve is coming out and saying, yeah, kind of a big problem. Now, two interesting stories came out here from two Fed presidents, one from Dallas, one from Boston. We have Robert Kaplan, who's a Federal Reserve Bank president in Dallas, and we have Eric Rosengren, who's a Boston Federal Reserve president. And both of these guys resigned this week, actually within hours of each other. That's weird. Are they seeing something that maybe is problematic? Are they abandoning the ship that is slowly sinking around them? Or are they in trouble because they were speculating in stocks that their policies were influencing? Let's dig into this story. Dallas Fed President Kaplan is going to retire early on August 9th. He's citing a trading disclosure distraction. And then we have Boston Fed President Eric Rosengren, who came under similar scrutiny, announced earlier in the day that he was retiring. Two guys, Dallas and Boston. This is what they look like. Both of these guys under allegations of very inappropriate trading. These guys are part of the Federal Reserve System. And so the policy that the feds implement throughout the United States, if these guys are investing in certain stocks or have their portfolio filled with different financial assets, well, maybe there's a conflict of interest there because they are the same people who are setting the monetary policy throughout the country. So they might know what stocks to invest in to enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else. You might call that insider trading or something like that, but they don't, those rules don't apply to them, right? They are too high up. So let's see what's going on here. This is Robert Stephen Kaplan. He's the president, CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas, former longtime Goldman Sachs executive. Appointed to the position September 8, 2015. Oh, he was the dean of the Harvard Business Law School. Oh yeah, so he went to Harvard. So he's very, very smart, knows way more than any of us. Let me turn this, I got to turn my night light just came on my computer, which makes the colors change a little bit on Windows. There it is. Get the colors back into a normal position. But yes, Robert Kaplan went to Harvard. Very, very smart. But he didn't go to Oxford, though, so he's not as smart as Jake Sullivan. The other guy that we have here is Eric Rosengren. Took office as 2007, 13th president of the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. And these guys are under scrutiny because he became the second regional central bank leader to resign on Monday, saying he was stepping down following a controversy over stock market trades he made. Early retirement follows an announcement by Eric, also left, but said it was over health concerns, has nothing to do with his investment portfolio activity. He said, Kaplan said, the guy who left over his stock trades, says that the Federal Reserve is approaching a critical point in our economic recovery that deliberates the future path of monetary policy. Unfortunately, the recent focus on my financial disclosure risks becoming a distraction to the Federal Reserve's execution of vital work. So, maybe you shouldn't be looking at my financial disclosure. His retirement takes place October 8th. So these guys are just dipping their toe in all sorts of different big trades, large dollar trades. Places like Amazon, Apple, Delta Airlines. Wall Street Journal first reported on those trades. They were making these trades. Subsequent to these disclosures, both of them said that they would be selling their stocks to avoid the appearance of conflict. Questions were raised because the Fed has conducted trillions of dollars in asset purchases aimed at helping markets function. They've bought corporate bonds from mega cap companies like Apple, the same companies that these guys were investing into. But they said, oh, no, I did nothing wrong. During my tenure, I've adhered to all the ethical standards. My securities investing activities met strict compliance rules, and on and on and on. The issue has reverberated through the Fed, officials pledging to tighten rules so that such potential conflicts don't happen again. Yeah, these guys, they're just, oh, no, no, we're following the rules and following all the ethics as they're buying stocks that the Fed is now purchasing, which would elevate the stock price there because they're buying them back in bulk. So pretty disgusting behavior, but of course, that's what happens in the U.S. government now. Let's take a look at some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, see if we have anything on these topics. We have Benedict Biden is here, says, Rob, just get used to us giving you the finger. And by the way, I won Arizona, so suck it. That's from Benedict Biden. That's pretty rude from Joe Biden. But, he's an ornery guy from time to time. Free Speech Unleashed says, perfect solution. If the government shuts down, simply take Congress's salary and use that to get Social Security checks, Medicare and Medicaid out of it. Maybe that will keep them from spending all the time if they no longer get paid. Yeah, the problem is that would be like, such a small fraction of anything. There's not enough money there. That's part of the problem. Medicare, Medicaid, a lot of these social, welfare systems that have been created by the government are so big and bloated that there's really nothing you can do to pare those back down anymore. And that's where a lot of the debt comes from. And a lot of the interest on the debt goes to playing those mandatory non-discretionary spending programs that the U.S. government continues to think work for some reason. Here's another one from Peely Wally, says, the USA has to be careful, Rob. In Europe, back around 2009, Greece hit a debt crisis, which ended up crippling the nation, fell into the biggest depression of any modern day country. Food prices rocketed. Basic living became so expensive and so bad. Hundreds of thousands of the smartest people left Greece for good. Taxes went through the roof. IMF had to step in to save the country. To this day, Greece still owes over $300 billion. That's from Peely Wally. Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons I think that you can get into about that. I think the U.S. is a little bit different given the size and the scope of the U.S., given the fact that the dollar is still, the world currency reserve. that sort of insulates it to some degree from some of that. But I think your point is well taken, right? If a lot of these systems start to collapse, it's not good. And the U.S. government has created this problem where they just keep kicking the can down the road. We have a couple other ones on this topic before we jump into our last segment of the day. It's Ed is here. Says, here's an idea. How about we stop spending so much effing money? This is absolutely insane. We shouldn't have to shut down the economy. We shouldn't have approved a COVID bill and we would shut down the government. Laughing out loud, the government shut down? What exactly is being shut down? The Washington Memorial? The state parks? Who cares? Shut it down. I'm with you, man. At this point, it's like, all right, let it go. And I know it would be a huge problem, but it's going to continue to be, I think it's inevitable. The U.S. is going to have to pay the bills. There is going to be a reckoning at some point in time. The U.S. government, unless I'm just totally, economically illiterate, I don't know how they just keep creating things out of thin air, money out of thin air. If you're going to be inflating the currency, in other words, if you're going to be saying, we don't have enough money, so we're just going to go create more of it, add more to the balance sheet, and we're going to keep borrowing this money to inflate the total money supply that exists in the United States, that necessarily inflates the cost, inflates the dollar, essentially. And so you need to have deflationary pressures that counterbalance those. Well, we don't have that really happening anymore. You can see that everywhere you look, in grocery stores, everywhere. And so at some point, things are going to have to come back into equilibrium to some degree. And there will be some hardship that results, but it's gonna have to happen at some point in time. All right, let's see what else we have. A couple other questions before we jump into the last segment. Got a handful more. Miss Donnie, aka Dallas Photography, is in the house, says, let me see if I understand this. Usually when a country needs money, you may borrow it. But if you need and are going into a default, that is really serious. Having lived in Argentina, where a default is something known, let me tell you, it affects every part of a citizen's economy, starting with inflation to having money for the usual needs of the population. So how does this work with the USA? Is someone buying the debt? Yes. Some years ago, China used to have a lot of USA debt, but I don't know right now. The markets are in red. A bearish sentiment is quite hard. Is there anyone with a witty brain to solve this? I would love to listen to your explanations a bit more. Thank you so much, Robert. Well, Miss Danny, I sort of am somebody who is a big believer in some of the alternative currencies. And I know, this is not a financial channel and I'm not offering any financial advice, but there's a great book called The Bitcoin Standard that is out there. And I would encourage you to maybe read that. It talks a lot about hard money and about money that stores its value well. And so there's a lot of interesting things happening in the crypto space that are sort of building a parallel system. I'm a big believer in that. I've talked about that a lot over on sort of offline and over on locals in the chat, but it is I think so 2 books I would recommend on this topic. Number 1, The Bitcoin Standard. Number 2, The Sovereign Individual. Can't recommend those books enough. The Sovereign Individual will tell you what is happening right now. It was written back in 1999, if I'm not mistaken, and it's very prescient. It was prognosticating the decline of the nation state. And I personally believe that we're in that transition right now. We're seeing the nation state become less necessary, less competent. It's not functioning appropriately anymore. And so people are going to be looking for parallel systems. And there are other places that have a store of value that are not the US dollar. This is why China is freaking out about Bitcoin. This is why the United States is freaking out about Bitcoin, because they know that it is a very strong, robust, competing standard that I think is going to be around for the long haul. And if you can sort of transition into another place where you can really maintain a high store of value, that's positive. If the US dollar wants to do whatever the feds want it to do, fine. You've at least got a little bit of a plan B in a different competing currency. And so I like where that's going. And what that means essentially is that you're not fixing the old system. You're going into a system that has hard money and deflationary pressures and some inflationary pressures hard coded into the system. So you can't have bureaucrats like Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, George Bush, Bill Clinton, George Bush, again, going in there and just printing money to satiate whatever social programs they want. They go and they can say, we're going to spend $3.5 trillion for domestic policy. Why? Because it's free money. They just make it up. The money just comes out of nowhere. So it's not hard money at all. It's all just fiat that really has nothing that it's tied to. It's not tied to a gold standard. It's not tied to anything. So if they need to now make up for budget deficits, they just manufacture more of the money that they control. They can't do that with Bitcoin, which is why they don't like it. They're going to try to roll people into CBDCs, which are the central banking currency, CBDC, central bank digital currency is what they're going to try to unroll. China is doing that right now, and the U.S. is going to be short behind that. Geomancy Games on YouTube says, when Trump was president, the Dems let cities literally burn and people died. Now they want to not play political games? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. That's Geomancy Games on YouTube. I'm Not Gases here says, Elizabeth Warren has that homeroom teacher, librarian, fun police vibe. Fun police vibe. Elizabeth Warren is just one of the worst. Now we have another one here from Ghost Gunner says, just another way these people are all crooks. To fix my last comment, also eerily applicable here, keep your brass stacks high. Got it. There it is. Keep your brass stacks high. Brass stacks. I know what that one means. The imminent housing crisis in China with Evergrande will have ripples here, if not lasting impacts. It's going to be a rough decade if this keeps up. I think I totally agree with you, Ghost Gunner. Not looking good. Not excited about the next 3 years with Joe Biden. Free Speech Unleashed says, I would like to think that the Repubs will stick to not voting to raise the debt ceiling. However, just like they did in 2011 when they eventually agreed to raise it at the last minute. Just a show for the voters who have short-term memories. I agree with you, Speech, right? They both want the grift to continue. Republicans want America to survive until they get back in charge so that they can continue the grift. We have Mustang Jeff says, constantly raising the debt limit reduces the value of our dollar. But what do politicians care? They're all millionaires and they're immune from SEC laws. Yeah, that's right. They can just do whatever they want. So they don't care about it. Now, it should matter to the rest of us because you can see that if you go to Costco in 2020, you get a pack of beef for $15. Now it's $25. Why? Are there less cows? Monster One says, your voice is sounding better. Glad to see you're finally getting over your COVID. Don't deny it. Everything is COVID now. That's right. Everything is COVID. It's ridiculous. Yeah, everywhere we go, it's like somebody coughs. COVID. Does that guy have COVID? Hotel, all these conferences, everybody's freaking out about it. It's driving me nuts. Voice is better. I'm still a little bit, not 100%, but it's getting there. Thanks for noticing. Monster One says, you know what backs our dollar? Giant bombs. Yeah, that's it, man. And the American people, right? You're sort of like cattle. We're all like cattle to the government. Pay your taxes. You can't really leave America. You can move out of America, but unless you renounce your citizenship, which is a big thing, if you go live somewhere else, you are still beholden to the American government. You still have to pay your taxes, even if you don't live in America, because that's what the U.S. government does now. Everybody's just sort of a good little asset for the government. And they're just going to milk you every day of your life until they're satiated, until there's nothing left. Funny Guy says, hey, Rob, why did the chicken cross the road? To give you the finger. Yeah, that's the chicken. Very rude chicken. Let's see. We have former LEO says, Biden told the UN he wanted to spend $500 billion to third world S-hole countries to fight climate change. Yeah, they want to spend all your money. Osak says, Rob, this reminds me of the trick where the place a ball under a cup, move it around the table, then point to the cup when they stop, but lift the cup. There's a middle finger. A lot of middle fingers here today over on watchingthewatchers.locals.com. A couple super chats came in over from YouTube. Curtis Bartle, shout out to Curtis with a couple of these, says, Luke, come to the dark side. May the force be with you. It's from Curtis Bartle. Thank you, Curtis. What's the dark side? I don't know. We also have Manuel Velez with a super chat. No question, but thank you for the support, Manuel. I appreciate it. All of those questions came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, an amazing community. I hope you join us there. All right, my friends. And so we've got one more segment on the show before we wrap it up for the night. Let's see what else we're talking about. Oh, yeah, that's right. Governor Hochul over from New York. New York City and New York State and Governor Hochul. They all have a little bit of vaccine hysteria, very excited about rolling out new mandates across all of New York. And that happened yesterday. A mandate went into effect from Andrew Cuomo. Remember the creepy Cuomo show? He is no longer in office anymore, resigned. And now we have a new governor there, Hochul. And she came in and she's going full steam ahead with these vaccine mandates, very excited about them. But it's strange because this could cause a cascading catastrophe in New York. In fact, thousands of hospital workers could be fired as the New York vaccine mandate goes into effect. It went into effect Monday night at midnight last night. We talked about it on the show, and now it is now in effect. Some hospital networks, including Northwell Health, have already fired more than 24 healthcare workers. Others will have 30 days to get the COVID vaccine or lose their jobs. Officials say 16% of the state hospital workers, or some 83,000 people, are not fully vaccinated. About 8% haven't gotten a single dose, putting them at risk of termination. So 83,000 folks are now officially, legally on the chopping block in New York. At Erie County Medical Center in Buffalo, 5% of the staff, about 400 people, are now unvaccinated and on leave. We stopped elective inpatient surgeries, said Tom, the president and CEO of the medical center. We stopped some of our outpatient patient visits. We stopped ICU medical transfers from other referral rural hospitals. We've asked for more time to work on strategies with the state to ensure that as many people as possible get vaccinated, which is just weird because I thought that this whole thing was about saving lives and improving health and sort of making sure that we don't buckle our healthcare systems. That was sort of the reason why we had the original 15 days to slow the spread, right? We wanted to flatten the curve so we didn't have big spikes of people going in and overwhelming the hospitals. 15 days, slow the spread, stay home. Okay, people are still going to get sick, but it's not going to be a big giant spike that overwhelms the hospital. Well, that turned into like 2 years now of continued COVID precautions. And I sort of get the feeling that it wasn't about kind of saving hospital capacity or making sure that we have all of the healthcare workers that we need, because they don't really care about them, do they? 83,000 of them are now on the chopping block in New York City. 400 people already on leave out of Erie. We had another several dozen that were fired out of Northwell Health, 30 days to get the jab. Otherwise, many more are now going bye-bye. So is it really about healthcare or stopping a problem with hospital capacity? Or is this just about bending the knee, following the mandates, doing whatever the government tells you to do? Kathy Hochul's the governor. Yesterday, she signed this, says, tonight, I signed an executive order to take bold action to alleviate potential healthcare staffing shortages following our vaccine mandate that keeps all New Yorkers healthy and safe, except the people that are going to be fired. Now, she's talking about staffing shortages that are following their vaccine mandate. So it sounds like to me, she is causing the healthcare staffing shortages. And so now she's signing an executive order to take bold action. What's in it? She said last night, I signed an executive order that's going to alleviate these potential shortages. It significantly expands the eligible healthcare workforce. Oh yeah, we talked about that. That includes the National Guard. Talked about that story yesterday. Allows additional healthcare workers to administer COVID-19 testing and vaccinations. So it sort of sounds like to me that there was a standard for who could be a healthcare worker, like licensed nurses, registered nurses and things like that, actual medical professionals. And because many of them are now being terminated, fired, thrown out, now they have to expand that definition. Oh, well, you look like somebody who can just shove a needle into somebody's arm. You're approved, and you're approved, and you're approved. And so they're just sort of dumbing down the standards so that they can get more bodies in to do some of the work. She has directed a 24/7 operations center led by the governor, New York governor, to monitor staffing operations and trends and advise healthcare facilities to troubleshoot situations with providers. So it's a problem that they are causing, literally. What a joke. As of Monday, she talks about all these people who have been vaccinated. The only way we can move past this pandemic is to ensure that everyone eligible is vaccinated. New York is the first in the nation to implement a healthcare worker vaccine mandate. Let's continue leading the way. And I've been saying this like a broken record for the last 18 months. New York is the canary in the coal mine. Always has been. And so I fully expect to see this roll out to the rest of the country. Happening in LA, happening in San Francisco. They're talking about this in various other parts of the country because New York started it. So they are wrecking their own healthcare industry, as we can see right now. And she says the only way out of this is to make sure that you're vaccinated. That's interesting. What about if you had COVID, you had natural immunity? Are you somebody who's not contributing to the total immunity of the United States? I think you might be, but not according to her. So what happens to those 80,000 people? What happens to any of those nurses, doctors, any medical providers, anybody who says, you know what, I'm not going to bend the knee and I'm just going to decide about my own well-being, and they get fired? What happens to them? Oh, well, they get excommunicated from society in general. According to MarketWatch, we got a report that says healthcare workers who are fired for refusing to be vaccinated will not even be eligible for unemployment benefits in most cases. So stuff that they've been sort of paying into as very loyal, very trusted healthcare workers, people who have been working the pandemic for the last 18 months, they are now going to make a personal decision that they believe that they're educated enough to make for themselves, because they are. They're going to stand their ground, get fired, and then thrown out of the system. No unemployment benefits at all. Employees at New York State hospitals, adult care, and long-term facilities who are fired or quit because they don't follow the mandate won't be allowed to collect unemployment benefits in most cases. New York Labor Department website has there saying, quote, absent a valid request for accommodation, not allowed to collect unemployment benefits, because these workplaces where employer has a compelling interest for the mandate, especially if they already require other immunizations. Hospital care workers and adult long-term care workers had until Monday to get the shot. It's up to employers then to develop a plan and implementation, but their plans could include termination, which we're already seeing. We already covered this. Several dozen are now terminated, and we have others that have deadlines by which they must comply, otherwise they're going to follow suit. And so it sort of seems like, you know, Governor Hochul is sort of like a vaccine hysteric, somebody who really, really wants to make sure that this happens regardless of anything else. And she's actually changing the entire structure of the healthcare system in the state of New York in order to achieve those goals. Well, that raises some eyebrows, especially in light of the fact that her daughter-in-law happens to be a lobbyist at a very big pharma company. CNBC is reporting this, says that her daughter-in-law, Governor Kathy Hochul's daughter-in-law, is a top lobbyist at a pharma firm that has sought to influence New York lawmakers. Brian Schwartz wrote this back on August 24th. Says that New York governor's daughter-in-law is a top lobbyist at a pharmaceutical firm that has been actively trying to influence state and federal lawmakers. Christina Hochul is married to the governor's son, William Hochul, the director of policy at Biogen. The company develops therapies to fight Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, muscular atrophy. Company's been involved in recent lobbying in New York. State lobbying disclosure shows that between January and June, Biogen paid $20,000 for different people to engage with state lawmakers. The disclosure report shows that lobbyist Biogen hired targeted leaders in the state Senate about Alzheimer's legislation. This is a picture of this just lovely family, just very, very upstanding. Nothing to see here going on at all. And we have a clip from the governor here in a minute. But I think that hard to tell from the quote down here at the bottom. But if you're trying to figure out who is who here, this is the governor, presuming that this is her husband here. And we've got William Hochul. Now, this guy looks like this guy's son. This guy does not look like he's related at all to the father at all. So we're going to say that this is the junior, and then this is his wife. This is the woman who is now a top lobbyist for a big pharma company that has some pretty strong ties to the governor of New York. Now, Christina Hochul, who is the name of that woman, she didn't respond to comments, but the governor's daughter-in-law is listed on federal lobbying disclosure reports showing that she and her team actively tried to influence members of Congress and those within President Joe Biden's administration. The daughter-in-law isn't the only close family member for Hochul that is creating optics problems. Hochul's husband, of course, William Hochul, he's a former federal prosecutor, works as senior vice president and general counsel at gambling and hospitality giant Delaware North. Daily Beast notes that Hochul's administration is going to have authority over key regulators that have ties to the gambling industry, including the New York State Gaming Commission. Isn't that nice? What a big, nice, happy family. Everybody just sort of works in industries that the government's rules impact directly. So that's really nice. Sounds very New York. Hochul's daughter-in-law has been a key lobbyist at the federal level. Let's see what else. Lobbying report notes that Hochul and her Biogen colleagues focus on issues pertaining to Medicaid and Medicare, and that the disclosure says that her team had discussions regarding a Medicare discount drug program to reduce out-of-pocket costs. So, this is sort of guilt by association to some degree. There's no evidence here that she works for Moderna or Pfizer or J&J or any one of these other big vaccine pushers, but I'm going to guess that they're all working on their own little versions of this stuff. Biogen probably has something in the works. Many other vaccines are being developed all across the country. We have version 2 vaccines that are set to come out, anytime. We've got a number of different therapeutics and different, pharmaceuticals that might be useful in the COVID fight. And we have a governor who's mandating that everybody comply with pharma. That's essentially what this comes down to. In New York, if you are non-pharma, let's say if you get the immunity naturally and you don't have to pay anybody for it, you just catch it and you're immune, well, you don't count because you got to go get something from pharma. And of course, Biogen is going to be right around the corner there. So let's take a look now at what Governor Hochul has to say about these vaccines. She was in a church, allegedly, Christian Cultural Center. And this is a woman who's in control of New York State and thousands of lives. And here she is ranting about the vaccines in God terms, making it religious now. Let's listen in. Here is Governor Hochul.
I prayed a lot to God during this time. And you know what? God did answer our prayers. He made the smartest men and women, the scientists, the doctors, the researchers. He made them come up with a vaccine that is from God to us.
Wow.
And we must say, thank you, God. Thank you.
Thank you,
and
God.
I wear my vaccinated necklace all the time to say, I'm vaccinated. All of you. Yes, I know you're vaccinated. You're the smart ones, but there's people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. You know this. You know who they are. I need you to be my apostles. I need you to go out and talk about it and say, we owe this to each other. We love each other. Jesus taught us to love one another. And how do you show that love? But to care about each other enough to say, please get vaccinated because I love you. I want you to live. I want our kids to be safe when they're in schools. I want you to be safe when you go to a doctor's office or to a hospital and are treated by somebody. You don't want to get the virus from them. You're already sick or you wouldn't be there. We have to solve this, my friends. I need every one of you. I need you to let them know that this is how we can fight this pandemic, come back to normal, and then start talking about the real issues that we have to. Fighting systemic racial injustice, which exists today. And if there's a denier, I will take you on any day because I've seen it. I know it exists. And we are not going to have a blind eye to this ever again any longer under my...
Oh my gosh, that woman. So, if you're vaxxed, you're very smart. If you're unvaxxed, you're just a big dummy. And you're probably somebody who is in cahoots with Satan also, in addition to that. And also, by the way, as soon as we're done with solving this whole COVID thing by mandating big pharma vaccines for everybody, we're going to just pivot over to systemic racism. These people are the worst in the world. All right, so that's Governor Hochul out there. Systemic racism, Satanists, also anti-vaxxed, idiot Satanists apparently is a new category for us. Maybe they'll put all of those into an extremist category as well. You've got domestic violent extremism, homegrown violent extremism, moron, anti-vax, Satan extremism, and the list just goes on and on. A lot of fun over there. Let's take a look at some questions from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. See what you have to say about this nonsense. What a stinking joke. All right, we have a couple questions here. Let's see. We got Lonely Truckers in the house. Says, hey, if I'm from out of state and have to deliver to massive choose shits, I must cross into New York and I must comply with their mandate. Yes, right? And we saw that from de Blasio himself. He said, if you want to, in New York City and elsewhere, if you want to participate in society in New York City, you've got to comply. Otherwise, you're sort of a non-citizen. You're kind of a subhuman to some degree. You're almost a Satanist because you're going against God's will. And you should probably get a little vaccine pendant as well, just so you can sort of adhere to this new religion of COVID, whatever that is, right? It's a new sort of group think. It's a new sort of mass hypnosis, mass psychosis that people are literally now, governors are saying that they are, I think she's Jesus. She might be Jesus because she needs apostles to go out there and deliver the COVID religion. These people are so blasphemous. It's like disgusting. All right. Geomancy Games is here, says, my son came home with a stomach ache yesterday. School nurse called me saying that he must quarantine for 10 days and get a COVID shot. They will not let him back to school without those two things. Completely insane. If I could somehow teach my son who has Asperger's, I would in a heartbeat. It requires a lot of resources that I just can't provide, but my taxes still have to go towards, even if I homeschool. The paranoia is real. I'm tired of this COVID hysteria. All it will take is a student saying they don't feel well to get 10 days away from school. No questions asked. And I think that's sort of by design, right? It's like, it's your problem. It's not our problem anymore. And even if it's not related to COVID. There was a map I saw over from New York that sort of had a pin in all of the different issues that were happening with schools and kids being sent home. And it was like the entire state. I mean, it looked like a map with a lot of pins in it. Let me just leave it at that. Good to see you, Geomancy. I understand your frustration. I don't have kids, but I can't, I'll tell you this, much to my mother's chagrin, not in a big hurry to go down that path in light of all of this nonsense right now. King Monster 1 says, she said, quote, I signed an executive order giving myself this power. What the totalitarian horse crap is this? How the hell do you sign an order giving yourself power you didn't have? I am now declaring by this executive order that I, Monster 1, am king of watching the watchers on locals. Nobody question it. It's been signed. Well, there you have it, I guess. It's been fun, locals. I'm not in charge anymore. King Monster 1 is in the house now by executive order. It's the same. It's the standards. I didn't set these rules. The U.S. government did. And now it's been commandeered. So, well, thanks, Monster 1. Hopefully goes well. Grateful for your executive order on that. We have another one here from Fight for Freedom. Says, Rob, big fan. I had the same problem at my place of employment, so I went to a lawyer, told me I should give him the finger. If that didn't work, use both middle fingers. What do you think? Well, Fight for Freedom, I'm not an employment lawyer. Don't know how that's going to go over for you. I don't know what your employer is going to do, if they're going to be receptive to that. I've talked to several lawyers about the COVID stuff, and many of them are, in many states, if you have at-will employment, a lot of these changes can just be made regardless of how long you've been there, regardless of whether you've had COVID or not. If your employer wants to mandate something, there's a lot of freedom for them to do that, as disgusting as it is. And so, you might have a situation where you have an employment contract. If they're changing the terms of that contract, then it might open you up for some remedy. But if you don't, if it's just at-will employment, they make a policy change, you don't comply with that. There's not much that a lot of attorneys can do from the people that I've spoken to. Now, there are other people that are filing very aggressive, very active lawsuits. We have John Halgren here on our channel that just sent me a bunch of these, copies of the filings. And so I'm going to be reading those probably on the plane tomorrow. But there are things that can be done. It's just not my area of expertise. I am not an employment lawyer. I am a criminal defense lawyer. I protect a different part of the Constitution, and I don't think that there's really any strong basis for what these laws are doing. I think that they're unconstitutional for the simple fact that they're not carving out exceptions that are for very important civil liberties that are enshrined in the Constitution, like free exercise of religion, like certain due process concepts and equal protection concepts that have all been codified. There is no equal protection under the law anymore. There's only equal protection if you are vaccinated. And there are no exceptions for that, for religion, for even things that would be perfect under a rational basis review, like natural immunity exceptions, which I think should be carved into all of these things. They're not. All right. Good to see you fight for freedom. We have another one from Major, says, the National Guard might not be the best for the job. When I was in the Army, it took one of these guys 19 jabs to take my blood. Oh, well, doing push-ups were very difficult afterwards for a week because my elbows were bloody and bruised. Sounds like some police officers I've had DUI cases with. People will come in, typically females, everything's just bruised up because some moron officer was like, oh, missed it, 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 oh, got it. There you go. And so we got to deal with that. Now, that's going to be now the New York medical healthcare system. So that's fun. Good luck over there. We have another one from Chairman of the board says, Rob, glad to hear your voice sounding healthy again. Do you think that this is all leading to a big Supreme Court case? I don't see how this doesn't all eventually end up there. I really do. I think it will end up there. And there will be some clarity. Let's leave it at that. If so, how do you think that will go? Will they not want to buck the system or defend people's constitutional rights to choose whether to get jabbed? Seems that the sooner this can get there, the better. Many people are going to suffer job loss and economic hardship over these employer and government mandates. Yeah, so Chairman of the board, if I had to speculate, it's a 6-3 court. I think that they'll say that there is some basis for the mandates, but not at the expense of some other constitutional provisions. I think that what will ultimately happen will be that anything that doesn't have exceptions for free exercise of religion, problematic. Anything that doesn't account for natural immunity, problematic. Anything that doesn't just provide an out for personal autonomy reasons is probably going to be problematic. And so I think that would be more in comportment with the Constitution. Remember, the Supreme Court is doing a lot to sort of try to make itself legitimate. They're very concerned about poll numbers. Judge Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, is hyper concerned about the court's legitimacy and sort of the legacy of the court. And so it's not going to be a hard-lined rule one way or the other, I don't think. I think that they'll try to sort of split this to some degree. We're probably not going to get a lot of clarity over this. I think that you're right. A lot of the damage is already going to be done by the time it gets there. And you're going to see this really sort of not a court, not taking place in the court of law, but you're seeing society sort of restructure and resort. And that companies that want to be Vax Looney Tunes, they're going to be Vax Looney Tunes. And they're going to necessarily filter out the employees who are not on board. And the people who want to sort of live their life freely and with their personal autonomy and want open and free spaces, they're also going to naturally coalesce around each other. And I think that that's going to start happening well before we get any clarity from the courts. It's going to be a cultural, in other words, it's not going to be a legal thing as much as it is a cultural thing. First, the law will catch up after the fact later down the road. It's a great question. I think could probably do a whole show on sort of gaming out that conversation. And once we start to see some more of this matriculate a little bit, evolve to some degree, then we're going to be able to game that out a little bit better. But I think that the Supreme Court is going to stand on the side of the Constitution as much as possible and not go into the COVID hysteria. We have some precedent for that, in fact, in particular with the CDC rule, right? We can kind of use that model. The CDC ruling where the Supreme Court came out and said, hey, Sloppy Joe, you can't come out here and just continue to seize people's properties from them. We saw Breyer, Justice Breyer, Justice Kagan, and Justice Sotomayor, where they actually included a graph of the COVID deaths in their opinion because they're COVID lunatics. We also have the 6 conservatives. Was it a 6-3 opinion? I think it was. That didn't give us much clarity on that, but they did sort of revert back to some of the fundamentals about separation of powers, about usurpation of power by one branch over the other, and they hung their hat on the constitutional provisions. I think we'll see a model that sort of follows that later down the line. We have King Monster 1 says, well, that's it. It's a cult. Yeah, and so that it's a new religion. It's the COVID religion. Governor Hochul is Jesus now. She needs apostles to go out there and carry her message. She doesn't wear a cross on her neck, though. She wears a vaccine mandate, whatever that was. And she goes out and preaches that anybody else who doesn't follow in lockstep with them is not doing God's work. And it is dumb, obviously, because the people there are smart and they're vaxxed, and the people who are not are dumb. So that's great. Chairman of the board says, so Trump got us the vaccine in record time. The vaccine is from God. So Hochul is saying Trump is God? Got it. I think if you asked her that question, her head would probably spin around 360 degrees like that little demon child from The Exorcist. King Monster 1 says, systemic racism? You mean like vaccine mandates? Yeah. Yeah, today at our conference we had a 2 panels that were focus groups, and we ran through some hypotheticals with them, about 15 people, I think, that made up sort of a fake jury panel, and these were just everyday regular citizens from all over Texas. And we asked them questions specifically about their reactions to COVID to some degree, and it was a wild experience. We got to see a lot of people that had a lot of disdain for the government and people of varied racial ethnicities, very unhappy with vaccine mandates, very unhappy with the government. The reason why we ask those questions, we're defense lawyers. We want to see what people have to think about the government in general. A lot of people very unhappy with the government. That just might be by virtue of the fact that we're in Texas. I don't know. But yeah, the vaccine mandates are pretty systemically racist because a lot of the people who are not getting the vaccines are minorities. We have, or certain demographics, to be more clear. Jay He says, can you tell me where I can get my I'm unvaccinated necklace from? Asking for a friend. I guess it must be a thing. I don't know. Governor Hochul has one. Is there an opposite one? I don't know. Avalon Acre says, I seem to remember something about a yellow star to identify yourself. Yeah, that was a thing that happened in history, wasn't it? Back in the 1930s in Adolf's Germany. We have Kareem165 says, thanks for another great show, Rob. Look forward to our next monthly meeting next Saturday. That's right, October 2nd. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's coming up. This Saturday, right? Yeah, this Saturday. That's going to be great. And I'm getting healthy, so that's great. Vax Them All says, I agree we should all go and show love to all of the non-vax to help them get the vax. If that does not work, we should all get together at the same time in one motion and give them the finger. Vax them all. I must be missing a finger joke today. We have Three Girlies says, so much for the separation of church and state. Hochul wants to create apostles for the cult of COVID. Vaccinations sanctioned by Saint Fauci. As much as having COVID sucks, it's better than drinking the Kool-Aid of that fruitcake and the ones like her. That's from Three Girlies in the house. Three Girlies is healing up right now, which is very good news. We have Perry Masonary says, asking Monster One, can I be the court jester? I have much experience. Well, Perry Masonary, the way this works is you just issue an executive order. So just draft one up. I'm now the jester, the court jester. So then it's yours. That's how this works now in this country. We have Miss Lucky. Miss Lucky's here. Says, the lady in New York is crazy. I was hoping things would change once Cuomo was gone, but I was wrong. Sergeant Bob says, hi, he's in Chino Valley soaking up some sun while I look at the rain and hail in BC. Good to see you, Miss Lucky. Yeah, and Sergeant Bob in the house, literally in the Arizona house. He's over in Chino Valley, which is a small town, beautiful area up in sort of kind of northwestern Arizona. I drive a lot up through there when I go to Seligman. I go right through there when I go to Seligman, Arizona, which is the Route 66, which is where that movie Cars was based on that little stretch of roadway in a town called Seligman. A lot of history there. Pretty cool. Hope Sergeant Bob is doing well in Chino Valley. And I'm sure we're going to connect soon since you are coming down to the valley, to the valley-ish area. So good to see you, Miss Lucky. Thanks for being here and chiming in. We have Mike Cervantes says, interestingly enough, a vaccinated person gave my brother and maybe our whole family COVID. Who's endangering who? It's a good question. I was thinking the same thing. Right? Our hotel has these stupid signs everywhere. If you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. I'm thinking, wait a minute. Aren't they the people who are sort of theoretically the breakthrough cases where they may be transmitting some of the virus, but asymptomatic because they've got the vax. So they could be spreading it all over the place without even knowing they're sick. If you're unvaxxed and you get it, well, maybe you're just sick. And so you stay home and you sort of isolate yourself. Whereas other people are walking around the world with all this bravado. Oh, I'm immune to COVID. No, you're not. You're kind of just carrying it to some degree. That's from Mike Cervantes. His whole family got COVID from somebody who was vaccinated. So, look, go read the CDC website and do whatever they tell you. Super Iron Bob says, my favorite study on the views of American Christians and their politics is conservative Christians admit that Jesus would be more liberal on some positions than they are. And for liberal Christians, they admit that Jesus would be more conservative on some positions than they are. Yeah, that's a good comment there, Super Iron Bob. But, it's new to me that Governor Hochul would be Jesus. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that, which is an interesting thing. And she doesn't wear a crucifix. She wears a COVID vaccine pendant. Monster One says, I've decided I don't want to be king. It's stressful. It's only been 20 minutes. My hair turned gray. I hereby sign a new executive order vacating my previous order. Darn it. I guess I'm back in charge. All right, well, that's okay. I'll take it. I love it. I happen to love locals. Monster One, nice job. Appreciate your service. I'll take it from here, though. All right, we have another one from Truman in the house. Says, Rob, I agree with your breakdown. I understand there are a lot of issues, but under ARS 13-0U812, it says give them the finger. Oh, okay. Not sure if that applies here, but I know in a lot of other cases it does. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that ARS statute, the finger statute. I should. It's in Title 13. That's the criminal code. But I'll have to go take a look at that. OU812. We don't have any letters in our Arizona revised statutes, unless it's like an A1 or a B2 or whatever that is. But I'll have to take a look at that. The finger statute. I wonder if that's applicable in courts. We have another one. Last one. Oh, Andrew Cuomo's here. Says, hey, give me just a few minutes alone with Hochul's daughter-in-law. I'm sure I can straighten out everything, if you know what I mean. And I do, Andrew, you creepy Cuomo. Pervert. All right, let's see what else we have over on YouTube. Clifford Barnes with a super chat says, Rob, is it a requirement to be mentally challenged to hold office? Not just the Dems. What does Graham do but talk, like Lindsey Graham? Jordan rolls up his sleeves, but it's either like mentally challenged or like borderline evil, right? Like sociopaths, narcissism, people who will kind of just waffle with whatever needs to be done, right? People that don't really have a lot of fortitude, are typically the people who do quite well in politics. And it's not good, is it? It's not good at all. Thanks for the support there, Clifford Barnes. We've got another one from Newbie of Death Reviews Stuff. Says, nasty guard docs and nurses are civilian docs and nurses the other 28 days a month. Recall our docs and nurses, then deploy them on the taxpayer's dime. Yeah. So, and it's sort of a different class of people, right? It's the people that the government wants in charge now. Anybody who is not vaccinated, who is not bending the knee, they are now enemies of the state. They have to be excommunicated and purged, and the rest of society must make do without them. They are the unclean. They are the unwashed. They are the people who are not doing the bidding of our Lord and Savior, Kathy Hochul. So now they have to be punished, and they are doing that in spades. We have another one over from Locals, says, from Perry Masonary, says, hey, Happy Monster 1 decided I am king, just saying. Now nobody must get the jab. Hey, Perry Masonary. He's actually very reasonable. We have a new dictator over on Locals. He's now in charge. We've got Super Iron Bob over on YouTube. Says Bitcoin is closer to a solution, but the public ledger means all of your transactions are permanently public. Feds would love that if it became the standard. There is some truth. There is truth to that, right? There are privacy concerns with Bitcoin because it is a public ledger and you can see everything that goes on. Now, I don't know how the Lightning Network works. This is a new network that Twitter just integrated. And I would imagine that all of that would also be public at some point. But the point here is that, Bitcoin could be sort of a store of value. You would store all of your stuff there, and then you could transfer. That would be like sort of your big, bank account. It's a hard money store of value. And you could move your money to other different currencies. I think there's a currency called Monero. There's other privacy-based cryptocurrencies that are rooted in privacy, right? They're sort of birthed out of privacy, whereas Bitcoin is not. And so, there's a lot there, but I think it's a very exciting space, and I'm pretty excited about where it's going. That was from Super Iron Bob. We have another one from Obina Ibi says, great show, Rob. Thumbs up. Thank you, Obina. I appreciate your support, and thanks for being here. That's a lot, my friends. I think we got through all the questions over on watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We got through all of the super chats over on YouTube, which means we're about done for the day. I want to thank everybody who is a supporter over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I forgot to update this slide this week because I was skidding in here for the show just to make sure that we could get it under the belt. But I'm going to update that tomorrow, and everybody will be on the board for a long time, so don't worry about that if you've signed up recently. I'll make sure that you're on there all next week for sure. We do have a monthly Locals meetup coming up this Saturday, October 2nd, 7 to 8 p.m. It is a Zoom meeting. It's a ton of fun, and you can have your camera on if you want. You can have your camera off if you want, no problem at all. And we just talk for about an hour, hour 15, hour 30, kind of depends. If you have any questions, if you have anything you want to share with us, if you want to just put some names to faces, that's the good place to do that. About 30 to 40 people that show up. Some people show up for 10 minutes. Some people stay the whole time. And so if you just want to come and pop by and say hello, I'll make sure that the registration is posted over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. It's a good time. It's not recorded. And so it's like a clubhouse room. Very temporary, but you can turn your cameras on and we can put names to faces, and it's a good time. We hear from people from all over the world. We get updates on what people are doing in their lives. We connect with people, send love, and we're building a community is the point of this. And so I'd love it if you joined us Saturday, October 2nd, 7 to 8 p.m. It's a ton of fun. It's for members and supporters over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And that, my friends, is it for me for the day. Want to thank you all for being here. Shout outs to people over on YouTube. We've got Playin' Hooky, Johnny Apocalypse. We've got Vijaya, Soria Morty. We've got Gary Carlisle, Jeremiah Bond, C. Reed is in the house, Do Better, Curtis Bartle, Johnny Apocalypse again, and Adam Marco. Over on Locals, final shout outs for the day. We've got I'm Not Gas, Joey Bondalero. We've got Avalon Acres. We have Osak is in the house. We have Tweak chiming in. Let's see who else. Mustang Jeff and many others. Brenneman chatting in the house. So I'll have to go back there. They're saying Rob's not going to like this conversation when he comes back and sees it. I'm sure that I will. But I'll take a look at that. All my friends from Watching the Watchers. .locals.com. And that, my friends, is it for me for the day. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tomorrow, I'm not sure what my schedule is going to be like. I am flying home tomorrow back to Arizona, and our flight leaves at, I think, 4 Texas time, which means I'll get home at about 4 Arizona time. So the show will definitely not be at 4 Arizona time tomorrow. I may not be able to get to a show. It just kind of depends on what our schedule is. We have our final day of the conference tomorrow. We start bright and early, and we finish at 2:30. Our car gets here at 2:45. We're off to the airport. I'm going to land. I got to reset some stuff up. So I may not get to a show tomorrow. We'll see. I'm going to do my best to see if I can. But if I don't, I apologize. We'll be back to business on Thursday because I am traveling tomorrow. But we'll see what we can do. If I see you, it may be later, it may be earlier. So just keep your ears peeled. If not, definitely back here on Thursday. Same place, same time. 4 p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, and 7 p.m. on the East Coast. And for that one Florida man, what did I do? There it is. Everyone else, my friends, have a tremendous evening. Sleep very, very well. I'll see you right back here on Thursday. Have a great night, my friends. Be well. Bye-bye.